But you know how it is. Give it a few minutes so that we're, slightly accommodating to typical libertarian lateness.
I'm just curious if the people need to be accepted in, or if they can just join.
Oh, let me see in the waiting room. I think I need to admit them.
Yeah, that's what I was putting in the chat. Since you're the host, you have to try to keep an eye on that.
Okay, didn't realize that's how it was set up. Got it.
Damn, there was a bunch of people in there. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm doing that now.
And that just went from 6 to 60. That's awesome.
Is that the meeting?
And then you can just go through and start muting people if you need to.
And hopefully I won't need to. And hopefully, since I had to do that, just
What's my
mask.
friend Caryn Ann? She lives in Colorado.
No.
Oh, I might need to.
See, Olga is awesome, but she's not above being muted.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm just waiting to admit everyone. Since I did that mass admission, we might end up with like, a highly intelligent troller. You know how we get those. So
This did go out to our donors, and there's some former donors on there, and it's very possible.
yeah.
So
We'll keep an eye out on them, and I'm usually pretty fast with the boot button, but I didn't get to scan to see if there was like any obvious
they
problem.
probably won't say anything. They'll just keep quiet and record and try to take notes. Like, oh, they said racism isn't the worst thing that's happening in the world at the moment. Something crazy like, you know what I mean? Like,
Or disagreeing where the statement should be placed. Apparently now disagreeing
Close the
on where
door.
a statement should be placed is racist. Who knew?
but all right, like I said, everybody. So Caryn Ann, I know I sent out the link to everybody, but this is Caryn Ann's show. She's the host of it. She's going to be taking the lead. I have calls to make, so I'm going to be in and out. But honestly, I'm a student here too. I'm weak on this shit. I need to learn. So this is her show, and I'm going to give it over to her.
Okay, yeah, and I want to move my computer to the other side of the room here for a second because I got some notes over here. And first thing I want to let you guys know is the way I like to do things is interactively. So because there's so many people though, maybe if you could do the hand raise thing so we're not jumping over each other. But I am more than glad to interact with questions. I think that's always more productive. And I'm just trying to get the participants list up so I can see if there's any hand raises. I got it now. And if someone would like to keep an eye on chat to see if there's any questions there that I need to address, to let me know. Because sometimes I might go off on something and cover it quickly when people actually have a lot of questions on that thing, because there's so many different levels of knowledge and interest. So I always just have a basic outline, and I like to go where the group wants to go. So please, anyone who's been in my live streams knows that I like participation. There's still a few people coming in, so I'm just giving it a couple more minutes. That's why I'm just blabbing right now.
Our account, but just so you know, our account tops out at 100. We're going to be trying to get I'm going to be getting the upgrade, but if you,
gotcha.
So yeah, but if you get to that point, then you're full.
I'm always full of something. Decorum, Ms. Harlos. Decorum. That's one thing I'm not full of, apparently. Okay. All right. So the way I decided that I was going to start is to give like a basic first, just like a 1, 2, 3, 4 outline of things that you're going to need to want to be very proficient at coming into convention. And then I'll start breaking down some of them. And what I anticipate is we'll start to see where weaknesses or interest is at. And in future meetings, we can go more in depth. So this is going to be somewhat surface. And I'll ask anyone who's not talking or has their hands raised, if you could mute yourself, because there is a lot of people in the room and it can get kind of distracting. All right, I am positive that most of you know me, but just the brief introduction is I'm the Libertarian Party National Secretary in exile from a bad LNC. So I used to be the actual secretary, but that's a long story in a galaxy far away. So, however, what's more interesting for this particular discussion is I joined the party not that long ago. I've only been in the party since 2014. But when I first got involved, I got involved very deeply right away with the Radical Caucus at a time when they were very, very effective at conventioneering. So when I went to the 2016 convention, which was my first convention, and I did get elected to an LNC position after only being in the party for a year and a half, as Region 1 representative, that's what I originally was. I got a trial by fire and learned an awful lot that still holds true to today. And since that time, I'm also in the middle of taking my registered parliamentarian exam. And, you know, most people, when they hear that, that sounds like really boring and like, what's a nice girl like you wanting to do something as horribly boring as that? And I'm going to tell you why. And some of you are going to end up being just like me. I got elected to the National Bylaws Committee, and I was in the National Bylaws Committee with some parliamentary, I call them the priests of the party, which treated everybody else like, you know, the unwashed laity. And Kim Ruff and I were on that. And the very first meeting, we went in there eager, full of ideas of things we wanted to do. And we just basically got the crap beat out of us through parliamentary maneuvering, to the point when we left that meeting, now we got on a live chat with each other and we just like looked at each other shell shocked going, what the hell just happened? Like we just got slapped all over the place. And from that moment on, I had determined that no one was ever going to do that to me again. And if I had any say in it, nobody would ever do that to anyone else in this party ever again, because it should be about the ideas, not about who can trick people with rules. And since the time that I've learned more about the rules, I'm going to just I'm going to mute all until we start seeing some hands up. Since I've started to learn more about the rules, I realize when you know them and you're using them properly, they actually are a very good thing. Just because some people misuse them does not make our parliamentary authority a bad thing. And you'll see a lot of anti-RONR sentiment in the party. And that's because those are people who have been abused by the priests. And it doesn't have to be that way. And part of the reason I do these things is so it doesn't have to happen to you either. And if you are planning on going to the convention, I know the caucus itself has extensive materials on how to help you become a delegate. But if you haven't looked those over and planned to be a delegate, to take the steps necessary to be a delegate, which is so specific to each state, do that like immediately after this meeting. You know, start laying the plans for it. The days are gone when you could just walk into the convention and be assured a seat. It used to be that way. 2016 changed all of that. That was the first maxed out convention we ever had. You compare it to like when the platform was deleted in 2006, there was only 380, I think, delegates there. Like, that's crazy that 380 people decided they took over the party then, which is why I laugh at all the wailing and gnashing of teeth today over some of the things. This is just things that happen when you're in a political party. However, let's say you either don't want to be a delegate or you don't make one of the limited spots. Go to the convention anyway, because there will be some open seats. So some people who didn't think they were going to be a delegate will end up being one. And there's a lot of work you can do to help the Mises delegates who are going to be tied to that table and tied to the voting, and they might need some behind the scenes conventioneering or work done, and you being there and not being tied to the table will be so useful. I cannot even tell you like how useful. And also, if you want to start to learn more about the conventioneering or just how to run the convention, volunteer to be a teller, even for whoever they fraudulently put in my seat. You'll learn a lot by being a teller for whoever the convention secretary is. And I saw something pop up in chat, and it's hard for me to look at both at the same time. But Olga asked, who determines the rules, who can be a delegate from one state? It's your state bylaws. That's why it is so specific to each state. And thank you, Caitlin. She says she just passed her RP. I'm assuming that was on the legacy exam, because I submitted my last assignment on the new exam in July and they still haven't graded it. It's completely awful. Completely awful. So make sure you come even if you're not. There will be something for you to do. You will learn a whole lot, and you'll be better prepared for next time. Your first convention is a blast. It's absolutely a blast. So one of the first things you need to do as you're getting ready, you're pretty sure you're going to be a delegate, or you already are a delegate. Make sure you understand the party's standing rules and bylaws. I cannot stress that enough. And I'm actually going to share my screen, because I don't want to just say these words and you guys go, yeah, because I can tell you, when I started asking my questions, Polly Frankel would say things, oh, you got to know the policy manual, you got to know the bylaws. And I'm like, I didn't want to seem stupid, so I didn't want to ask what those things were, because it was like somebody was speaking a foreign language to me. I'd never been involved in anything like this before. I didn't know what the hell bylaws were, or where even to find them if I wanted to. So I'm going to share my screen here, because I do have them downloaded. So let me just figure out where. Sometimes Zoom can be a little, nah. Okay, where are you, preview? Where are you, preview? One second, isn't this so weird? It's not showing. Let me exit out of here a second and hit share again. I've been having a lot of problems with Zoom lately. Okay, here we go. At first, it's going to be the wrong thing on the screen, and then I'll fix it. You're going to see a delegate allocation manual, which is something we are going to look at, but we want to look at the bylaws first. So let me hit File, Open. And I'm on this old MacBook Air that I can hear it groaning. Okay, here they are. Okay, so do you guys, hopefully you're seeing on the screen, and I'm going to double check here, the party bylaws. Yep, it looks that way. Somebody please tell me if that is not what you are seeing. Okay, so you'll see up at the top here, it says Libertarian Party bylaws, convention special rules, judicial committee rules of appellate procedure. The only two things you really need to worry about here is the bylaws and the convention special rules. And there's an index here. First part of it is the bylaws.
Hey, Karen Ann,
Yes.
we see unofficial notification of delegate allocation.
Okay, hold on. Let me, thank you. Because Zoom is being a pain in the booty. Show all windows. Why is it doing? So let me stop share for a second here. Let's go back. Here we go. Let's try this again. So you should be seeing the bylaws now.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for alerting me. Okay, so there's 3 documents in one here. All you guys need to worry about is the bylaws and the convention special rules. And if I had to tell you to master one over the other, it would be the convention special rules. But if you go to the beginning, you'll see it's indexed. First is the bylaws, and we have relatively simple bylaws for national. And then towards the bottom here, you will see it goes into, the rules. So you have articles or bylaws, rules or convention rules. Now, the difference between convention rules and the bylaws. Bylaws can never be suspended. Bylaws are kind of like, the set in stone rule of the party. They can only be amended at convention. They can never be suspended. Now, I know some of your states have suspendable bylaws. that's a whole other thing I could go on a parliamentary rant about. But so let me be a little more clear. They cannot be suspended unless they provide for their own suspension, meaning within any particular article, it says it can be suspended. Otherwise, they can't. But rules are always suspendable. So if you have ever been in a meeting or watched any national conventions and you hear someone move to suspend the rules to do X, it's because they want to do something that's outside of the typical rules, but those are not law. They're kind of like the Pirates Code. They're more like suggestions, and they are suspendable by a 2/3 vote. You can find this document on the LP website, lp.org. If you go down to the very bottom in the footer, it'll say bylaws. Or you can write me and I'll send you a copy if you can't find them. The lp.org website is not always the easiest to navigate. But also in the bylaws, there are some things that you can see quite obviously have to do with conventions, like Article 10, conventions. You're going to want to read that. You're going to want to read about voting procedures. But other things, it doesn't have anything really to do with the convention. So you can pretty much skim through the bylaws, but concentrate on the convention standing rules. You need to master them. I'm going to go through them somewhat quickly here, just so you know what's in there, but we're not going to go into them in depth. That might be another class, but you'll see here, the agenda is already set in the special rules. And the agenda will go in this order unless it's amended at the very beginning of the convention, in which case it could be very easily amended because everyone's debating it, or you can amend it later on. It's much more difficult to amend the agenda later on. So if the caucus decides it's in its best interest that you'd rather hear certain things first or do certain things first, you're going to need to be prepared to amend the agenda in the beginning. So as you can see, this is the basic business every single convention. You have your call to order, you have credentials committee, in which the delegates are approved by the delegates. That's the weirdest thing in Roberts, is that you have people who aren't yet delegates approving who will be delegates. It's kind of like this Schrodinger's delegate situation, but that's the way it is. If there's going to be any floor fights about delegates, like I'm anticipating there probably will be regarding the Delaware delegates, this is when that will happen. Then when you adopt the agenda, because you actually have delegates who can vote on things, the treasurer will give a short report. The audit committee will give a short report. These are pro forma, very little exciting happens with those. Watch, this time it's going to be like some big controversy. Then you have the bylaws and rules committee report. We're going to go over that, what that entails in more detail later on. Then you elect a judicial committee. We, I hope, learned our lesson this time, that you don't elect people who wear boots on their heads and take everything as a joke onto the judicial committee. And take a look at the judicial committee decision. And if those people are rerunning, decide who you want to reelect, if any of them. And anyone here who has a desire for that to get with maybe Michael, you have to have been in the party for 5 consecutive years before you qualify to be on the judicial committee. It's intended to be for people who are more mature in the party, not brand new people. Then we have the election of the party officers and at-large members. You may notice it doesn't mention regionals. Regionals are elected different ways depending on the region. They have their own procedures. So you will need to check with your regional representatives now to see how the new regionals will be elected. Typically, there'll be a breakout caucus, a regional caucus at the convention at some point over the weekend, in which the regional and the regional alternates will be elected. I think the only state that doesn't do it that way is California, because they are a region all of their own and they elect theirs at their state convention. Then you have the platform committee report. We're not doing president and VP this year, so you can forget about number 10. And number 11, resolutions, and 12, other business. I can tell you, we never get to 11 and 12. We're lucky if we have full elections of the National Committee. Almost every year we run out of time, and at-larges on the National Committee, they end up suspending the rules and allowing them to be elected with less than a majority. So for instance, in my circumstance where we had 3 at-large vote to remove me, they didn't even get 40% of the vote. And those were the people who got to vote to remove somebody who won with over a majority on the first vote. I don't think that's particularly just or fair, but that's not their fault. They might have gotten 50% on the second round, but the fact remains the highest vote getter out of all of the at-larges was Laura Epke with 38% of the vote. Might have been 39. I think it was 38 though. And then it gives you the voting procedures. So you're going to want to look through that so you can see on how things are voted on. Polling procedure, this very rarely gets done, but if there is a challenge of a particular election, the convention secretary can poll the state delegate by delegate to make sure their vote was recorded correctly. I've never seen this done in reality. Aaron Starr tried to do this in 2020 just to prove a point, and he got just booed down, I think. So I've never seen this happen, but it's there as a safeguard in case there is some kind of controversy. Then there's different rules for debating and voting on our bylaws and convention rules. Same thing for platform. And same thing for resolutions. You don't have to worry about presidential and VP. And then the rules for election of the officers. Notice here for each office, a majority vote will be necessary, but this is in the convention rules, so it is suspendable. So these are all things you are going to want to look through. And that is it for our convention rules. They are pretty sparse considering we're, a national political party. So it's definitely doable for you to understand them. I would certainly suggest that you print out a copy of these and bring them with you to convention. You're going to want to continually refer to them. And if you ever have any questions on them or we want to go into more in detail, we can go over some of these procedures in more detail in a future meeting and even perhaps do some mock elections so that you get a feel for it. Because sometimes reading it's not quite the same as doing it. Ryan asked where you can get those. If you go to lp.org, scroll down to the bottom of the page in the footer, it'll say bylaws, and that's where you can find it. Worst comes to worst, get in touch with me on Facebook and I can email you a copy. And Michael just put a link there, but sometimes, it takes a while to navigate that site sometimes. Now you noticed there were bylaws and platform that can be amended every 2 years. These committees, at least the bylaws committee, has been meeting now for like 9 months. And my attitude is that when you give a committee that long to amend something, they think they have to propose amendments just for the sake of doing them. Like I'd love to see a committee come out one time and just go, it's all good, but that never happens. And, idle hands make the devil's work. So whenever the bylaws committee is meeting for this long, when that report comes out, study it, because already there's some terrible proposals, which I don't know if they've passed the committee yet, but such as making the chair a 4-year term. Can you imagine? Like the delegates can easily make the chair a 4-year term, just reelect them. But imagine if we were stuck with Nick right now for another 2 years, or if JBH didn't resign, and it's not a good idea. 4-year terms are a bad idea for anybody, but any of the offices. It's bad to have a 4-year term for the secretary. It's just bad. And they are also looking to get rid of Roberts. Another horribly bad idea because it's Roberts that protects your rights. The people who are in Massachusetts, I think, will tell you how little Francis and Francis protects your rights. So even though it might seem very libertarian to go, we don't need no stinking rules. Okay, until you get ran over by having your rights trampled. But again, I'm sure that will be gone into much greater detail when these reports come out, because maybe it won't make it out of committee. If you go to lp.org, in the footer again, it'll say subcommittees over to the far right. And if you go to that page, there are mailing lists, open, readable to the public mailing lists for the platform committee and for the bylaws committee. Go to those links and read what they're talking about. Don't wait for the report. So you can subscribe to them where you get an email update, just like the LNC list. You can't post to it, but you can get read-only emails. And I would suggest everyone subscribe to that. Platform hasn't met yet. Platform always starts to meet later. We're going to start meeting in the beginning of January. I am the interim chair of the platform committee right now. We have no idea who the permanent chair will be. That will be the first order of business when we first meet. But the list is there. And depending upon the chair of the committee, depends upon how transparent they will be. Obviously, I think you guys know if I'm elected permanent chair of the platform committee, it'll be freaking transparent. I don't like things done in secret, quite obviously. And that's what got me in trouble. 1 second here. And I'm sure Michael is planning on this, but the Radical Caucus used to do this, and this was very, very helpful, is for the caucus to put out a detailed written examination that they can pass out of each of the proposals with recommendations and why. Because delegates will want something to study, and even people who aren't in your caucus will study those and maybe become persuaded by the arguments. So highly suggest doing that. I will try to get from the Radical Caucus an example of what they put out in 2016 to give like kind of a working template for you guys. Also, and again, I'm sure Michael is working on this, but the key to successful conventioneering is to have a reliable communication system, whether you guys are, in a signal group, telegraph, whatever it may be. You need to be able to communicate quickly with everyone. That doesn't require actually getting up and talking to them, because what can happen is you might be fully prepared for a bylaws amendment and you might like it. Then someone amends it and you don't know if that amendment is going to be good or bad. So the caucus will need to have people who are qualified, parliamentarians preferably, to look at it as the amendments are made and be able to get to somebody to signal out to the group, vote no on this amendment, vote yes on this amendment. Because amendments can change something substantially. So I'm sure there'll be some communication system, but more importantly, you need to have someone involved in that who is mature in the party, knows the issues to make the recommendations. Because I'm going to give you an example of something that seemed harmful and how it could have been really bad. I was the parliamentarian for the Kansas convention. I hope I'm not trying to call anyone out here or embarrass anyone. I hope I'm not. And I saw the Mises recommendations that were on the table. And one of the amendments that was proposed was to add the word simple before the word majority on voting. So shall be by a simple majority. And the recommendation was vote for it. This is harmless. It's not harmless. That was a terrible amendment. Nobody should have voted for it. And I think we actually got it pulled when I told the chair the implications of it. When it comes to bylaws, every word is presumed to mean something and no word is ever presumed to be put there for no reason. Since the word majority is already well defined as being more than half, why do you need to add the word simple before it? You must mean something other than just a majority. You know what a simple majority can be easily interpreted to mean? A plurality. So don't add words just to add words. You're not simplifying things. Always get a parliamentarian's advice. I know they were trying to distinguish it from a 2/3 majority. A 2/3 is not a majority. Don't ever call it a 2/3 majority. Call it a 2/3 vote. A majority is more than half. Just sometimes adding things for clarity muddles the issue. I like to give that example because it just shows how one word can really mess things up. Also, I'm going to tell you another way one word can mess things up, and you wouldn't know this if you weren't a parliamentarian. If the terms of office say officers shall serve for a term of X years or until their successors are elected, they are entitled to a trial if they should be subject to removal, though the LNC ignored that because ours say or, so I was entitled to a trial. If it says and until their successors are elected, they are not entitled to a trial. A non-parliamentarian would not know that the simple difference between or and would deny people due process. So again, those are the sorts of things. Bylaws are tricky, tricky, tricky. John Counts asks, what makes a parliamentarian? Is it that you're the guy designated to read things, or you just know legalese? It's that you know Robert's Rules of Order. It's parliamentary ease rather than even legalese, but I am a paralegal by trade. But it's that you know parliamentary law. And it does take a lot of study to know those little niggly things like that. The big things anyone can learn. The big things you don't need a parliamentarian for. So, and we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay. Also, you know how candidates have campaign whips. You know, they'll usually have someone from their delegation that will help, you know, be their cheerleader, rah, vote for such and such candidate. If there are issues the caucus cares about, you need issues whips on every delegation that can, if somebody's waffling, they're not sure, that can continue to pump up the issues that will be voted on. Platform issues, resolutions, whatever it may be, are just as important as the candidates, and they get neglected a lot. So train people in each delegation, and it might be the same person who's the candidate whip for myself or for Angela or for anyone else, but do not neglect issues whips. I find that's the one thing that everyone neglects. Also, I would highly suggest, and this, you know, I'm sticking this bug in Michael's ear when he reads this, find some goodwill action that you can do that will put a good feeling in the minds of the delegates about the caucus, particularly in such a contentious year. For instance, the Women's Caucus always provides babysitting services. Okay, it's nothing really to do with the convention business per se, but it's a service they provide that engenders goodwill with the rest of the delegates. Some things, like just some suggestions off the top of my head, get some people to volunteer to do airport shuttling. Something like that you're getting nothing directly from, you're just doing it to be kind. And a little kindness goes a long way. Ryan Brown says, yeah, there was the lady in 2020 who had the vodka purse. I highly recommend vodka purses. That's definitely an act of goodwill. But I suggest the caucus organizes acts of goodwill that you're just doing it out of the kindness of your heart. And it makes the convention more pleasant for everyone. And something that I hope in a future session we will cover, and maybe even start a little bit today, depending upon whether anyone has questions, what we end up getting more into, is the difficulty of getting things moved from the floor. For instance, I do not like this. Almost every proposal that gets heard has to come through a committee over which the National Committee has put its fingers on the scale. For instance, the entire Bylaws Committee is appointed by the LNC. If you don't see the problem with that, just realize that the bylaws are what restrain the LNC. And then to have the LNC appoint the people that are going to be amending the rules that restrain them is the classic case of the fox guarding the henhouse. I do not know why that is. The LNC should never be appointing the Bylaws Committee, or they should only get to appoint part of it, like the Platform Committee. The platform, and it's 10 members that are on bylaws. And it's just whoever's good enough friends with people, you know, on the LNC. Very few of them even interview the candidates. I tended to do that. I would send out a survey and ask them where they stood. Though I will say, I think I voted for some people, to my shame, on this particular Bylaws Committee that I regret. That a lot of crap was going on. I probably didn't do enough research like I did in years past. But just know that those 10 members are appointed by the LNC, and judge that accordingly, even with a good LNC. Luke asks if you should form your own, perhaps, and let me put a pin in that, and we'll come back to that. The Platform Committee is 20 members. It's much more balanced because 15 of those members come from the affiliates and only 5 are appointed by the LNC. So it's to me much more representative of the party membership. And the way it's composed is that the first 5 seats are states that have the highest per capita national memberships. That's how these small states are able to get platform committee representatives, like New Hampshire gets one, Nevada very often gets one, Wyoming, Montana. The smaller states have a chance with the per capita. Then the next 10 seats are by the states that have the top 10 national members. So that's how California, Florida, Texas always get seats. And the last 5 seats are appointed by the LNC. That's much more balanced. So that's how those committees are formed. However, if you have a great bylaws proposal and you can't get the bylaws committee to propose them, or if they kill it in committee, it's very, very difficult to get it heard on the floor. And I do not like the way our system is that way. And perhaps that's a bylaws amendment or a convention rules amendment that could be brought up. But to have things so tightly controlled through committee, I just don't think reflects the bottom up nature of this party. So it takes some very advanced conventioneering to get things moved from the floor, but it can be done. I closed the back door on the statement of principles through floor work. So it can be done. If there's resolutions you want heard, again, that is all very advanced conventioneering, but if you plan it right, it can be done. And I'd have to hear what kind of issues maybe you were planning on or people were thinking on, and I could give you some strategies that I think would work. And hello, Suze. So back to the question about forming your own platform and bylaws committees. If there's some issues that you want to try to get the National Bylaws or Platform Committee to consider, it would be a good idea to have them workshop through your own committee first so that they're not half-cocked. And that those same 2 committees can be the one that analyze the proposals that eventually do come out and help write the recommendations. So that's probably an excellent idea to form your own like shadow bylaws and platform committee. So on that. Now, also part of advanced conventioneering, you do not know where your delegation is going to be seated. It's a big floor. When you get in there, you'll see signs that will say, you know, Colorado sits here. You have to sit with your state. You can't just sit where you want. You will be grouped by state. And one second. And if you're lucky, but not everyone's going to be this lucky, the way you get recognized is there will be, if this is like past conventions, 2 like, so you'll have a big middle row with a bunch of delegations, and then there'll be like a walkway on either side of that big middle section. And then there'll be a section to the far right, a section to the far left. At the front of those 2 walkways, there'll be a mic on at the front of both of them and a mic more towards the back of both of them. So there's 4 mics, and they alternate between the mics and also between for and against proposals in order to be heard in debate. If there's issues you really care about, start working your way towards that microphone and be ready to be first in line. If you're like 5th in line, you're probably not going to get heard. Someone's is going to close debate or time will run out. So there's a lot of planning involved as well as to where to position yourself at certain times in order to be sure to be heard. And I'm going to try to say this as politely as possible. Not everyone who has an idea is the best one to get on the microphone. The caucus should plan to put the people who are the most persuasive and good debaters as to get up at the mic, because a lot of times there's some very well-meaning people that you can tell they're very passionate about it, but they're just not the best person to be the spokesperson for it. So I hope the caucus organizes in that way to show some restraint as to who's going to be the spokesperson. And if you can tell that somebody you think is a great spokesperson is just annoying the hell out of the convention, be able to tell that person you're doing well, but for some reason you're just rubbing people the wrong way. Because there were a lot of things that got passed in 2018, simply because Aaron Starr didn't realize he was turning off the entire convention. So the minute he got up to speak for something, everyone just voted no on it out of just annoyance at him. And that can happen. And he is very articulate and very intelligent, but for some reason, that convention, he couldn't read the room. Reading the room is one of the most important skills you can have. Sometimes you just got to give up, because if you press a point too long on one issue, you might win that issue, but people will vote against anything else you advocate simply out of spite for the rest of the convention. That is just how human nature is. That's not saying anyone is acting in bad faith. It's just people. It's just people. Also, one thing the Radical Caucus did that I thought worked well, but it can work against you as well this year, considering the stupid contentiousness that's in the party, where there are some people who just hate other people because they don't like what caucus they belong to. But what the Radical Caucus did is not only had electronic signaling, we had people walking the floor. I had a lightsaber. Anyone from 2016 will remember that that would go from red to green. And that was particularly helpful when it came to amendments. So when something was heard, we would turn the lightsaber red or green, depending upon whether we were trying to signal to people sympathetic to us to vote for or against. And that's how we also got the message out quickly on amendments. But somebody who hated the Radical Caucus could look for our signal and go, well, I'm just going to vote against it because I don't like them. So that's a calculated risk. But I can tell you in 2016, what happened with us was there were people who were watching how we were signaling and said, these people, I don't know who they are, but they have good judgment on everything I've seen so far. I don't know anything about this issue, but because I've seen how they voted before, I'm going to start following their signals. And we had people following our signals who weren't part of the caucus. Different climate today, so that's a calculated risk. We also had a sign, which I should have brought one of them or a picture of one of them, that was just a thumb sign. And people were, we handed those out to people. And when they saw the lightsaber, they would either hold the thumb up or flip it with thumb down. And that way we signaled across the room instantaneously. And there's a great photobomb that I'll post in the Mises Caucus group that was all over the national papers, a photobomb I inadvertently did, where Gary Johnson was talking before the camera and I'm walking behind him with a big thumbs down sign, but I was signaling on something else that was going on. It wasn't about him, but I thought it was one of the funniest photobombs ever. So those sorts of things are things to plan for. Also, swag. People love swag and they're persuaded by it, believe it or not. And I'm sure Michael is working on all of that. All right. Now down to the actual like nitty-gritty of the convention. And when I'm saying swag, I don't mean necessarily Mises branded swag. I mean things that people I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, like, or if it's branded very subtly, like pens, notepads, things that people need at convention. If you start to brainstorm things you think people might need, again, that builds goodwill. Even things like little toiletry kits you could hand out if somebody forgot to bring them. Those are the sorts of things that build goodwill with delegates, and you can brand them. But it's more that you're just trying to help people. And branded AR-15, I'll definitely take one of those. I'll take two. Okay. After you know all this kind of stuff and all of your strategy, a lot of it is going to come down to having a basic mastery of Robert's rules. And really all you need is a basic mastery, because no one is going to become a parliamentarian between now and then. However, the caucus should have people who are either actual parliamentarians or people who are, but just haven't bothered to get the credential because, I don't need no stinking piece of paper. But you should have a group of people who are your designated parliamentarians that can be there to advise on the spot. But other than that, that's for the complex questions, like if something really weird comes up. But other than that, every single person in this group, I am going to share my screen again because there's something I want to show you right here. Okay, this is my Kindle thing, but let me go to the cover, the title page. Cover. This thing that's on my screen, hopefully somebody please let me know if you're not seeing it, but you should be seeing the cover of a book that says Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief, the 3rd edition. You should have the full copy of Robert's. Tell everyone you should have it, but that's not what you need to study. What you need to study is this book. It's only 194 pages, not small print. You can read it in under 2 hours and you will feel 10,000 times better about any meeting you go to just by understanding the in brief. The in brief is that is all any average member needs to master. Now, if you're going to be chair of something, you're going to need to know more. If you're going to be a parliamentarian, you need to know more. But if you just want to be a competent member, this is what you need to buy. Everyone in this room needs to buy this. It's about $8 and have it with you and study it. Because that right there will improve your effectiveness easily tenfold. And I'm probably underestimating how much it will improve your effectiveness. I think I got somebody who wants to come in. 1 second here. And thank you, Sean, for putting that up there. And also, I see that Luke Enzor's put the link also from robertsrules.com. If you go to the official website, and I believe it is robertsrules.com for the National Association of Parliamentarians, you can get copies of both Roberts and in brief that are hole punched. So they're like loose leaf hole punch. And that's much more useful because you can lay it flat. Rather, Amazon doesn't offer that. You can only get that from the official site. And it's not that much more. And I would highly recommend it because then you could put it in a notebook. It makes it easier. The National Association of Parliamentarians also sells pre-printed tabs for all of the major sections. I would highly suggest you get those. And there's also little cheat sheets that they sell. And none of it's terribly expensive, and it will all be very, very helpful for you. So get Roberts in brief. And then the second most valuable thing you can do is, do it while you're cleaning the house or sometime that you have time. Watch the videos of the 2016 and 2018 conventions. The 2020 convention was useless because it was just a hot mess because of COVID. But what anyone may like or not like about Nick Sarwark, there is one thing that I would fight anyone on. He's the best presiding officer I've ever witnessed. And nearly any parliamentarian I know that has watched him run a convention has said that he is excellent. It just takes a certain force of personality to keep a convention under control. There are some older conventions if you want to see what happens when you have somebody who just doesn't have that it factor. And it's not really something that you can learn. It's really something you have or you haven't. Nick was a boss at those two conventions and he ran it very, very well. But you will also learn the flow of how people debate, how quickly things get shut down, how they get shut down by observing those two conventions. And you will learn more by watching those two conventions than any person could teach you in any kind of a training seminar. So I would highly suggest that. And as you're watching it, keep in mind some of the things I said about positioning yourself near mics and things like that. Because if you watch it closely, you'll see people doing that. You will see people doing that maneuvering and you will learn from it. And you might come up with some more ideas because I try to come away from every convention with more and more strategies. So going to some of the basics though of Roberts, which is just a little bit of what I wanted to cover today. And that was really last on my list of what I wanted to cover today. Before we get into that though, was there any questions on any of this other broad overview stuff that I that I covered, either raise your hand, stick it in chat. I'm going to give a few minutes to see if anyone has that before we like move on to the Robert stuff. And I'm going to take a sip of my drug of choice. Thankfully, it's legal, caffeine. Okay, it doesn't look like it, but again, if something occurs to you, you know, I'm not a petty tyrant about, or oh, here we go. The latest edition, I thought the third was the latest. Is there a fourth now, Charles? The major change between the 11th edition and the 12th edition of Roberts wasn't to content, it was to citation method. It used to be cited, and you'll see old citations that are cited like a deposition transcript for any of you guys who work in the law, where it'll be like page and line number. The new Roberts cites more like the Bible, which I think is funny because my show is called The Cult of R.O.N.R. because I think people treat it like a cult, where it's chapter and verse. That's the major difference and why it would be best to, whatever the latest edition is of Unbrief, get that, because the citations will be right to the current version of Roberts. But the concepts will be the same between the two of them. Are there any risks to reliable internet at convention? There always is. The convention committee does its best to try to make sure that doesn't happen, and every convention it still happens. But I think a lot of that might have been because, you know, technology has grown a lot, you know, since my first convention in 2016. So hopefully not, but it's something you might want to plan for. Eric asks, besides electing Angela to chair, and I know you just missed saying and me to secretary again, Eric, because I know you love me. Do we have a bulleted list of ideal outcomes? That would be a question probably for Michael. You should. There should be lots of contingency plans as well. Preparation is the key to success. And Luke, I'd be more than happy to take a look at any of that or assist in any of that. As I've said multiple times, I'm busy with my own life. I've never wanted to be in any kind of leadership position on the caucus, but I would love to serve on any kind of advisory committees to help leadership, because that's my strength. So just always let me know if you need any help. All right, so I'm gonna pull up something else. Oh, two other things before we get to the Roberts thing. I want to show you guys something else. But let me put it up on my screen here first so that I'm on a little 13-inch MacBook. That's why it's making some of this really difficult for me, because I don't have multiple screens. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. And I want to show you something that I just sent out, quote unquote, unofficially, but it is the exact same thing I would have sent out if the LNC hadn't removed me. This is the sort of things that are my strengths. I like preparing manuals. So this is the notification of delegate allocations manual. Only reason it says unofficial is because, you know, of what happened to me. The information in it is completely accurate. I am going to be posting a link so that everyone can download a copy of this on my public figure page, but you could always write me. I sent both Angela and Michael a copy of this. I sent one out to every state chair. 2 state chairs, I guess, seem to think, you know, if you're not properly elected, you can't give good information, and they refuse to accept it, which to me is just like, wow, somebody is trying to give you some educational material that you could take or leave, and you won't even take it. Okay, do what you want. But some of the pettiness in this party. So I wanted to flip through this a little to show you where you can find some information here that you may have some questions about. So for instance, this manual explains exactly how delegates are allocated and breaks down in plain language what the bylaws means. Because first time I read the bylaws on this, my eyes crossed. And then you will see, here's the official allocations. And I show here how many delegates each state got based upon their national member numbers and how many they got based upon the 2020 presidential vote. And you add those two together. So 9 + 4 = 13 for Alabama. And you can see your percentages. And if you're a numbers person, it's very interesting. So you can see the maximum number of primary delegates at this convention is 1,053. However, each state, even like say Wyoming, which only gets 4 delegates, gets to appoint up to 50 alternates. You get to appoint the largest of these two numbers, 50 or the number of delegates that you have. So for instance, California, which has 103 delegates, can have 103 alternates. But if you have, everyone gets at least 50 is what I'm trying to say. So that's another reason why go to convention, even if you're not a delegate, because even if you get in as an alternate in one state, you might end up getting seated in that state. And there is more than enough room for people to be appointed as alternates. And if your state isn't appointing up to 50 alternates at your convention, insist that they do. They're entitled to it. Okay, here, and I'm going to be posting this graphic on Facebook, all my social medias. It gives you a nice graphical representation of where all the numbers are and which states grew and shrunk. So purple is no change. For instance, Colorado had no change. Green, you have more delegates than you did in 2020, and red, you have less. And here, just for statistical purposes, I do a comparison. And 2016 is all in black because that was the first year I started doing this. And you can see year from year by the color coding how your state may have grown or shrank. So for instance, just looking at Colorado, because it's my state, in 2016, we had 32. And then we grew by 2. In 2018, we had 34. And then we went up to 35. And then we stayed at 35. So there's some interesting trends you can get from this kind of data. And that's why I gave it in various formats, because you learn different things when it's presented in different ways. And I also notify of the national committee seats that are earned for 2024. So the states, these 15 states all have automatic platform committee seats for 2024. So if you are one of those states, I'm going to name them off: New Hampshire, Wyoming, Colorado, Alaska, Nevada, California, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, Georgia, and Illinois will all have automatic platform committee seats for the 2024 convention. And the top 5 get credentials committee. And those are always these same states: California, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, New York. And that was it. But there's a lot of information packed into here. So if this is something any of you guys would like to have, again, Michael has it. I'm going to be making it widely available. It'll be stuck up on Lpedia as well. It's good information. Now let's go over to something I prepared, I believe, in 2020, which goes over some of the not quick and not so dirty Robert's Rules of Order. I think this was published in LP News. I can find out which one, and you could get a copy of that LP News. But I'm not gonna read it verbatim, but what I'm gonna do is start going over the concepts. So I'm gonna stop that share there a second. Somebody else is trying to get in. Give me 1 sec to flip back to my notes. All righty. Okay. Now, obviously, y'all are familiar just from your local meetings with certain meeting officials. I keep having to admit people in it. I have to keep flipping my screen when I do that. So you have the chair. And one thing, though, I do want to let you know, because it's something tactically the caucus may want to consider, but it could also make a lot of enemies. The party chair does not have to be the convention chair. The party secretary doesn't have to be the convention secretary. The delegates have the right to appoint a chair pro tem for the convention if they don't think they're going to be treated fairly by the current chair. And for whatever reason, they could also appoint a convention secretary pro tem. And that is kind of something I've been talking with the caucus about, because, I obviously have a personal interest in that. But that is something to discuss perhaps in another meeting. But if strategically that is something the caucus wants to do, it's something any member has a right to do. But just realize, for instance, the secretary one wouldn't be quite so controversial, and you probably would have a lot of support because a lot of people think I should be the convention secretary. But if you thought Whitney was not going to treat you fairly, it's very, very, very a risk to try to make someone else be convention chair, but it can be done. Just throwing that out there. One sec, got to go back because I keep admitting people. There's also the parliamentarian. Richard Brown is typically our parliamentarian. One thing you should know, the parliamentarian is not there to serve the membership. I know we've gotten away with this a lot, where a member will say, well, I want to ask the parliamentarian a question. I doubt Whitney will let Richard Brown answer questions of members, and she really shouldn't. The convention parliamentarian is there to advise the chair, and the chair does not have to accept any of their recommendations. They're strictly advisory. So that is probably something that we've gotten a bit spoiled on, being able to ask Richard questions, but Whitney, I don't think will allow it, and she will be right not to allow it, which is why I keep emphasizing that you guys need your own parliamentarians to advise you. There's the vote tellers, who are the assistants to the convention secretary. And if there's any concern at all about funky business going on in the vote telling, get Mises people on the vote telling team. And usually it's very difficult to recruit people to be on that team, that it's easy to get on it. In other words, like they can never have enough volunteers. So your volunteering to be on the vote telling team would probably be very gratefully received, but it is a lot of work. And it also will keep you from being seated with your delegation. You'll be seated with the vote tellers. You'll still be able to vote on ballot votes. You still be able to vote on everything. But again, it kind of removes you from the camaraderie of your delegation. But that is a very important position to fill. And it's very important to have people from all the different points of view on the vote telling team, and it helps quell any suspicions of funky business. So it's good to have a wide variety of caucuses and different ideological viewpoints on the vote telling team. Yeah, Liz was one of my vote tellers. You know, Michael, you should probably maybe consider having Liz give a short presentation at some point on that, to maybe encourage or educate people as to what actually goes on and how crazy it can get. Okay, so beyond the convention officials, the way, just like at any meeting, a convention is nothing but a big meeting that is slightly more complicated, is the only way business gets done is through motions. And a motion is just basically you making a statement of something you would like to have done. It can be procedural, like for example, I moved to shorten the time for nomination speeches to 10 minutes, you know, whatever it might be. And I'm not suggesting you make that motion, I'm just giving you an example. And that's the type of motion that's very frequently heard during elections. And it ends up screwing the candidates, by the way, like why we ever want to eliminate nomination speeches. That's how you end up with bad people on the LNC. A lot of times we elect at-larges with the convention never hearing from any of them. So they just end up voting for somebody whose name they recognize who might not be the best person. All motions must receive a second. And a second by you or anyone else does not indicate that you agree with the motion. It just means that you agree that it is worthy of being heard. And worthy might even be the wrong word. It's that it should be heard, you know, that it's relevant. And even if you're going to vote against it, a second does not indicate your approval. Very rarely in a convention do things die for lack of a second. Usually there's some fool who will second even the worst, like non-relevant motion, but I have seen it happen. I have a video of that happening in 2018 to Aaron Starr, because he annoyed everyone so badly that he actually suffered the humiliation of making a motion die for a lack of a second at a convention. And that's just mortifying. But the original motion might not be what passes. You can change the original motion through amendments. That's how they get changed. And any motion can have only 2 levels of amendment at any one time. So for instance, taking the example that we had before, where I moved to shorten the time for nomination speeches to 10 minutes. Let's say somebody thought it should be 15 minutes. So you would stand up after you're recognized, depending upon what mic that you're at, you would move to amend the main motion to strike the word 10 and insert the word 15. Then debate proceeds to the amendment. No longer are we debating the entire motion, then debate gets limited to the amendment. The only thing debate focuses on is the one issue directly in front of you, because everything gets prioritized. And it's very logical when you think about it. You solve the thing you have to solve before you can get to the next thing, before you can get to the next thing. And it's called the order of precedence of motions. And the thing with the lowest precedent is the main motion, because it could be amended. There's all kinds of things, all kinds of fun things you can do to a motion. Then once you have an amendment, you can amend the amendment, but the scope of amendment is limited to the amendment itself. So in our example, where you had somebody strike the word 10 and insert 15, you couldn't then make a second amendment to say, lengthen the time and make it a different number, because that goes beyond the scope of the amendment. When you're on an amendment, all you could talk about or amend is that the word 15. You can make it bigger, you can make it less, that's all that. And then you vote on the amendment. And if it passes, the original motion is changed accordingly, and then it's open to amendment again. So the scope of everything gets limited as you go down the funnel, then you vote on each thing, go back up the funnel, and then everything's open to amendment again. And this process goes on until the motion is perfected and there's no other debate, or time runs out, or the question is called. You cannot yell from your seat, "I call the question." I see it happen at too many conventions. It is not what's called a privileged motion. A privileged motion is something that you can cut line for, that you can yell out and you get recognition. Calling the question is not a privileged motion. It's a regular motion like anything else. And there's something that is allowed, but it is a total dick move. So I don't suggest you do it. And I'm sure you've all seen it and gotten very irritated. And Ms. Decorum myself actually did get up at a Colorado convention and yelled out, "That was a real dick move." Chair didn't call me out of order, but I was like so upset because this happens all the time. Don't get up, have your debate, and close your debate point with, "And I call the question." Because that's just like, I got to say everything I want to say now. I want to prevent anyone else from speaking. You're allowed to do that under Roberts, and everyone will think you're an asshole. So if you're going to call the question, just get up and move to call the question. Don't get your words in and then try to silence everybody else, because that's exactly how it will be taken. So calling the question is just another way to say you move to end debate. And because this impinges upon members' rights, like if you ever wonder, why do some things require a majority vote and why do some things require a 2/3 vote? It's very easy to determine that, even if you haven't had the rules memorized. Anything that limits the rights of members will require a 2/3 vote. The basic premise behind Roberts is that it protects at least 3 groups of people. It protects the majority, it protects the assembly as a whole, but it also protects a significant minority. And what Roberts considers a significant minority is any number over 1/3. So that's why when you start to affect people's rights, you have to get at least 2/3 of the convention, or those voting. I'm going to get back to that in 1 second, to vote for it, because you are impinging upon the rights of the minority. Now, a 2/3 vote is not 2/3 of everybody in the room. It's 2/3 of those voting. And abstentions don't count as a vote. Like abstentions, you're not voting, you're choosing not to vote. You don't ever call for abstentions in your meetings or anywhere. if you're doing a roll call, someone could say abstain. But if you're doing a hand raise, don't ever say the yays, the nays, and the abstains. The abstains abstain by just not being yay or nay. Same thing with voice votes or anything like that. So when you go to move to end debate, you will need a 2/3 of those voting in order to do that, because you are foreclosing the rights of others. So anytime you're wondering what vote threshold it is, if you just think, is this violating, not violating, but foreclosing on somebody's rights, then you can be reasonably assured that it will take 2/3. And before you make this motion, read the room, because if it's obvious that most people want to hear more debate, you will waste more time trying to end debate than if you just let everybody have their say. The most frustrating thing at convention is the amount of time we argue about time, where if we just ignored all of that and did the thing, it would be quicker. So that comes on to move to extend time. That's the opposite of calling the question. It's when time runs out and you want more speaking time. Again, because everyone had the right to expect it to end at the time certain, it impinges upon rights. It requires a 2/3 vote. And what happens is somebody will move to extend time for 5 minutes, and we will spend 20 minutes debating the motion to extend time for 5 minutes. Count the cost, even if you don't want to extend. If it's for a reasonable amount of time, like 5 minutes, just let it go. Let it go. Let it go, please. Oh my God. The more times you see that happening, you're going to want to put your head through the drywall. A motion to extend time is basically a motion to amend something previously adopted, and usually the agenda, because the agenda will, or the standing rules, because it has time limits in it. The motion's undebatable and immediately proceeds to a vote. Same thing with calling the question. That motion is undebatable and proceeds immediately to a vote. Not all motions are debatable. And if you think about it, most of it's quite logical. If you're moving to end debate, it would be ridiculous to debate ending debate, because the whole purpose is to end debate. So if you just think about the logic of it, you'll start to just be able to intuit which motions are debatable and undebatable, at least on the basic ones. And I'm going to get to questions in just 1 second after I'm done with talking about moving to extend time. Same thing with moving to extend time. It's looking to extend time for just a certain sliver. So to debate it would just be, ridiculous. But what happens is that people will make all kinds of motions. Whatever, just let it go. All right. Let me get to questions here. 1 second here. Yes, you can only have primary and secondary amendments. But once you have a primary amendment and you haven't voted on it, you can amend it again. So say you had a primary and secondary, you voted on the secondary, so now you're back to the primary. That primary can be amended again to bring you back to another secondary. But at any one time, there can only be the main motion, a primary amendment, and a secondary amendment pending. And that brings up an interesting question when it comes to calling the question. If you just say, I move to call the question, it is presumed that you only mean the immediately pending question. So if you're dealing with something that is a motion that has a primary and secondary amendment, when you move to call the question, it is presumed you are only moving to end debate on the secondary amendment. If you intend to end debate on the whole stack, the secondary, the primary, and the main motion, you have to say, I move to call all previous questions. It's very important that you do that, because otherwise it will be just the immediately pending question. Okay, continuing. Does calling the question proceed to a vote even when a point of order is raised? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. Do you mean that there is a point of order? It depends on what the point of order is called on. No, because the point of order, generally, if I'm going to guess at what you're getting at. There's some motion going on. Somebody calls a point of order, and then someone immediately moves to call the question on the motion over which a point of order is raised. No, you have to resolve the point of order. The point of order has a higher precedence. But someone can call the question on the vote on a point of order that's appealed. When the chair makes a ruling, and this is just a good enough time as any to do it, in nearly every circumstance, there's so few exceptions that I'm comfortable in saying that like 99.9% of the time you will be correct to believe it's appealable. So say the chair makes a ruling, you can appeal from the ruling of the chair. And that is a privileged motion. Points of order are also a privileged motion. You do not need to be at a mic to make a point of order. You can stand up in your chair and yell point of order. In fact, you have to, because points of order are waived if not timely raised. If debate proceeds on, you're done. The point of order is untimely. There are some exceptions to that, such as when the bylaws are violated, but it's just a good rule of thumb to just say you got to raise it immediately. So that is a time you can interrupt all pending business. Okay. Can amendment be a total, meaning swap? Yes, but that's called a substitution. We'll get to that maybe this time. That's a little bit more advanced. I'm the queen of substitutions. I love substitutions, particularly on platform committees. They're very, very useful. So yes, but that's a little bit more advanced than we're talking about right now. So a question is called and immediately afterward, the point of order is raised. If the point of order is raised on the motion upon which the point of order was called, the chair is going to have to determine if the point of order was timely. If the chair determines it was untimely, then the point of order doesn't get heard, but you can appeal from the ruling of the chair that the point of order was untimely. Just an FYI, be safe and raise your points of order timely. Let's see what else here. Is it possible for someone to use motions or procedures to try to prevent me or Angela from being a candidate? No. The bylaws set who can be a candidate, and as long as we don't violate the bylaws by joining another political party, or there's just very basic things. You have to be a national party member. I'm a life member. I believe Angela's a life member, so there won't be like a membership that lapses that skipped our attention. So no. And the fact that I've been suspended does not prevent me from running, too much to the tears of some people. And yeah, you cannot object to nominations. The way you object to a nomination is by voting against the person. Okay, so back to where we were at. All right, raise a point of privilege, personal privilege. As it says, it's a privilege motion, which means that you can interrupt the normal speaking order. You get to cut in line as long as you don't interrupt somebody who's presently speaking, and that's the general rule. And the only things you raise points of personal privilege for are things like, for instance, in 2018, it was so freezing in the room that most of the women were fleeing the room. And a point of personal privilege was raised. Can you please turn down the air conditioning? Because I can't stay in this room, type of thing. Or a point of personal privilege where there's a lot of chatter and you can't hear, to ask the chair to politely, you don't tell the chair to be polite, but to ask the chair if he could or she could request that chatter be kept down. Request for information. This is very often abused. It used to be called point of information. And what people used to do was, and it's not, they would raise a point of information and then proceed to give the convention information. That is not what that's for. So they changed the name to request for information. It is a privileged motion. You can't interrupt someone who's presently speaking, but you can skip in line. But what you are doing is you're telling the convention that there's information that you think you have to have in order to understand this motion. And so you are asking for someone to give you information. You are not seeking permission to pontificate to the rest of the convention. This, though, brings us something that I probably should have addressed in the beginning, and it seems silly at first, but it actually isn't. A lot of people get turned off by the formality that is required by Robert's rules. There actually is a very good reason for that. It depersonalizes things. So for instance, in the case of point of personal privilege, I'm finding it difficult to participate because there's an awful lot of chatter going on in the room. That's the type of request you would make. You don't go because the assholes who are sitting in the Missouri delegation won't shut up. Okay. That's the whole point of it. You try to make it. I'm sorry if anyone from Missouri is in here. I've never had any problems with you guys. It just came to my mind. You don't call out specific people. You generalize it. And that's also why when you have a request for information, the person you may need information from is actually the person who made the original motion, but you don't go to the mic and go, hey, Bob, what did you mean by that? All questions get directed through the chair. Even when they're eventually going to be rerouted to somebody else, the chair reroutes it. And that puts a separation in some situations which can become potentially confrontational. So all questions, all inquiries, even if it's not the chair who will ultimately answer it, gets directed to the chair. So it's always, Mr. Chair, I have a request for information. You tell the chair the information that you need, and the chair might go, Mr. Jones, can you answer this question for Mrs. Jones, or whatever it may be. You will always use Miss, Mr., whatever, and a last name. When you're on the mic, you do not use first names. You use formalities, or you even make it even more impersonal by saying the delegate that last spoke. Like, I disagree with the delegate that last spoke, and then you give your argument. If you think someone is lying, you don't say that. You say, the delegate that last spoke, I believe, had some incorrect information. Okay, that's always the way to maintain the professionalism at convention. You will find also that the chair will do this, and you may find yourself doing that. It might not be the delegate that last spoke. It might be the delegate from Ohio or the delegate from Colorado. So we often defer to titles. And though I know, and I have the same reaction, but we have to deal with the world that we're in, that a lot of people don't like the identity politics thing. And I brought this up even on the Roberts Forum, is how is Roberts going to deal with the fact that there are people in this world who do not identify as Mr. or Ms. or whatever it is they may identify. I'm not trying to get into a debate on that. So modern practice is now saying you use titles. So instead of Ms. Harlos, it would be Delegate Harlos. And you'll start to see that more and more. So rather than the gentleman from North Carolina, it will be the delegate from North Carolina, so that nobody's presuming anyone's gender or identification. Whether we like that or not, that is going to become modern practice. Just FYI. So it's something that you put a personal privilege to Dick. Request for information. How large of a dick would it take to feed the entire convention? Okay. How many slices does it get cut up into? The jokes they tell themselves on my page. Oh my God, people are asking about the condiments. Oh my God. Okay. Going back to where we were. Point of parliamentary inquiry. This is also a privilege motion, which means you can interrupt speaking order, but you can't interrupt somebody who's speaking. And its purpose is to request that the chair clarify issues of parliamentary procedure in play at the moment if you are confused. where you just like, okay, I'm lost. Something just happened. I can't figure out. Or you could say, chair, Madam Chair, I'm a bit confused. What exactly are we debating on now? Are we debating on the secondary amendment? Something like that. You don't ever use this to make a debate point by stealth. And if it isn't a question that has to be answered at that moment for you to be able to meaningfully participate, then it is not privileged. You might have a general point of parliamentary inquiry that is more broad and it can wait. Then let it wait. Anything that is typically a privileged motion, but really is not needed at that moment, it becomes non-privileged due to that fact. Okay. Point of order, which we kind of went over, but this is a privileged motion, which means you not only, this is like the ultra privileged motion, you not only interrupt the normal speaking order, if it's urgent, and most times it is, you can interrupt another member while speaking. And it's used to draw the chair's attention to a serious breach of order, rules, or the bylaws. And then the chair has to make a ruling saying that the point of order is either well taken or not well taken, and state their reason why. A lot of times chairs don't do that, but they're supposed to. Any member can appeal the ruling of the chair, but it needs to be seconded. It doesn't have to be the member that made the point of order. Any member can appeal from the ruling of the chair, needs a second. And then the decision's turned over to the body to make a final determination whether to uphold or overturn the ruling of the chair. Now, it's a strange motion, the ruling of the chair, because the rules of debate are somewhat different. The chair always gets to speak first, and then other people can, and you can only speak once, no matter how many times you might get in line, and then the chair gets to speak last. Chair has the prerogative of speaking first and last on an appeal, and then you vote. Unlike most motions in which you need more yeses than nos to have something to win, for an appeal, you have to have more no's than yeses, because the question isn't shall the ruling of the chair be overturned? It's shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? So a tie will keep it sustained. You need more no's than yeses in order to win an appeal, but it is a majority. It's just kind of a little weird, and the chair will usually explain each time that peculiarity. I wish Roberts would change, because it confuses the heck out of everybody. And that is one instance in which the chair can participate in debate without leaving the chair. If, say, Whitney has a motion she wishes to make or wishes to debate, you've seen Nick do this before, she will hand the gavel off to the vice chair and assume the position of a normal delegate, because the chair has to maintain impartiality. However, the chair can vote on any written ballot, because you don't get to see how they vote. And though this will not happen in convention, though when I said it won't, it could, in theory, on a counted vote, the chair can vote to break a tie, to break or cause a tie, just like in any meeting. I've never seen it happen, but it could. Unless the convention rules provide otherwise, which it does in some circumstances, nearly every vote is taken first by a voice vote. So, all those in favor, you say aye, all those against say nay. But you have the smartasses who think that they're going to win a motion simply by shouting louder, as if people can't figure out that's what happens. But it's going to happen. Someone could then move for a rising vote. And that is, it needs a second. And that's a right that you have. And the chair, unless they think it's dilatory, if he thinks it was really clear one side or the other won, he can say, no, we're not doing that, it's dilatory. Otherwise, the chair will then say, well, everyone who wanted, all the ayes, please stand. Sit. Well, all the nays, please stand. And then it gives a visual indication of it. But if it's still in doubt, for instance, if it looks really close, you can then move for full division of the assembly, which is a counted vote. It's a little bit more advanced, but actually goes really quickly. there's a couple tellers that are assigned to that who count off. And you should always feel free to move for a counted vote if you think it is really close. And that happens quite a bit at convention. So those are the basics. But what you will see happen a lot is people will get up to move to suspend the rules to do something out of order. And that in the beginning, when everyone's fresh and they're all eager to get shit done, like they don't mind it, but it gets more and more annoying as time goes on. And it's really annoying at the end of convention when you can't fully elect your national committee because you wasted hours in the beginning moving that, move a resolution that Harry Potter is the best book of all time. Literally things like that happen at the beginning of convention. But if there is some resolution that the caucus wants passed, that's what you would do. I would suggest doing it more towards the beginning when people are more tolerant. You'd get up, move to suspend the rules to hear the following resolution, and you'd read the resolution. And that is the basics. There's a lot more that could be getting into the nitty gritty, but understanding those basics, you will be effective. So is there any questions at this time? I'm just going, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna read, hold on, I disagree with the last asshole that spoke. I would just die if somebody said that. The disturbing freak from California just made a good point. Oh my word. And Luke says, I've only ever seen JBH vote as chair in the absence of it. JBH voted on everything and I objected and nobody cared. Nick didn't do that and Whitney doesn't do that. I don't know why he did that. He just did. Oh, did he on that? I didn't notice. He very rarely did that. Let me put it that way, Dave. He usually was decent at that because he knew it ruins your credibility for no gain. If you're going to take a hit to your credibility, at least try to make sure there's a potential gain for you out of it. Okay. I'm going to give it a few minutes to see if there's anything. And what I would suggest you guys think about though, and probably communicate it to Heiss, if out of any of these broader topics, perhaps about instance, if you have a bylaws amendment, how to get it moved from the floor, what's the tactics for that? More of the finer points of order or some of these more complicated moves, or to start getting into more complicated motions like motions to rescind, motions for reconsideration. I am sure there are going to be motions that people are going to want to plan to make that have to do with the events of last year. And at convention, last 2 years, at convention is the time to do it. The LNC never censured JBH. Well, the convention can. The convention could, and I would hope they do, condemn my removal. The convention could bitch slap the LNC for not resolving Delaware at that meeting where they spent 5.5 hours doing nothing. The convention is ultimately who runs this party. So the convention can also pass resolutions directing the LNC to accomplish certain things over the next 2 years, or to stop doing certain things over the next 2 years. So that's more advanced. I don't think it's planned for or done enough. So when the caucus has its direction, I would be more than happy to speak on that as far as any ideas I might have for that. And just a personal offer to everyone here, and this offer I actually make to everyone regardless of caucus, regardless of whether I agree with them or not. I think we all benefit from people being parliamentarily educated. If you have a county group or any kind of group that you would like a little small group training, where people can ask questions and we'll go over whatever they like. I volunteer for that. One of the other reasons I am getting my certification is to donate services to the LP. I'm not very cash rich. I have more time than money. So I never, ever, ever charge libertarian groups for parliamentary services. So perhaps if you think you need a parliamentarian at your state convention, I've been the state parliamentarian for Pennsylvania during that very controversial convention. I think ended up going smoothly because the Mises people trusted that I wasn't out to get them, even when I was telling the chair that some of the motions that you guys were making were wrong then. And I think it helped keep the peace because nobody thought I was doing that for malice. And I don't. Like, when it comes to parliamentary stuff, I don't have a side. My side is what is parliamentarily correct. I was the parliamentarian for Florida. I was the parliamentarian for Kansas. And I'm going to be the Mises Caucus parliamentarian for Arizona because the convention has its own, and good for them. The caucus is bringing their own, which is going to be me, and potentially for Virginia. So that is my service to the party. If it is out of state and you need it in person, I do ask that you get me there. But if it's Zoom, it's no cost to you guys. This is why I got this training. I eventually am going to be a working parliamentarian, but I would still never charge libertarians. I will charge the fuck out of some Republicans, though, I'll tell you that. But I will never, ever charge libertarians. It's my service. So please take advantage of it because I enjoy it and I learn something more each time I do this. And I think it makes us much better, professional and efficient as a party. And give it a few more minutes for questions. And if not, I think we've gabbed on enough tonight. I could talk for 10 hours and you don't want that. My husband will tell you. You definitely don't want that. We used to both have a home office in the same room. He went and got one outside of the house because he couldn't take it anymore. Because all day I'm saying, oh, da, 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 and he's like, oh my God, you just don't stop. I gotta go. Okay, everyone. I'm gonna stick my email address here in chat. If any of the documents I raised you can't find or you just don't feel like hunting and pecking for, just write me and I'll get it to you. If you come up with a question that you say, oh crap, I should have asked that, just write me. And I'll help you any way that I can. And if you have issues going on in your affiliate that you have, concerns about, I'll honestly advise you as to whether I think you're right or wrong or what's going on. Okay. Apparently, and I just got a message flash across the screen that I have an LPCO meeting I didn't even know about because it's like, are you ready? I'm like, yay, another meeting. Okay, everyone, have a good night. I'm going to end out the room and then I'll be sending the recording over to Michael Heiss. And I look forward to seeing you all in Reno and it will be a blast, I am sure. So love you all. Have a good night.